So first of all, the overall audit results, we do have an unmodified opinion, which basically means a clean opinion that we're reporting on GAAP. And then we also, as part of the process, we do legal compliance testing, which is checking to make sure that the city follows state statutes on various things like deposits and investments, disbursements, conflict of interest, miscellaneous, and then any debt restrictions that might occur there. And for this year, as we went through that testing, we had no findings noted. The one finding we did have was related to material audit adjustment. So for this year, there was a couple unique situations where one of them was related to the ARPA dollars, just on the recognition of the revenue on there to match up with the expenditures there. So we had one adjustment there, and then also retainage with all the projects that were going on. We had seen another retainage payable that added to the capital items there. So nothing too big there, but we had to report that those were a couple items that we found as part of the audit.
Do you know off the top of your head with the adjusting entry, like how large it was for the one related to ARPA?
I think the ARPA was about 200,000, but it's just the timing of when the revenue was recognized. Okay. And then I think the retainage was right around 300,000 type of thing. Once again, it's kind of a timing thing. It's what is payable at the end of the year, so it'll be paid in the following year too. So
perfect. Thank you.
We have worked through the process so that we don't do that again.
Okay. Well, it's not like we get ARPA funds like that for COVID all the time. So.
Yeah.
Construction stuff seems to get messier some years more so than others, and we've gotten people coming in and out. Seems like there was a communication miss because of the way the process was set up. So we're looking at that and making the changes we need to make to avoid that.
Yeah, and what's unique about the retainage, it's kind of the amount that's held over, so it's not like a specific invoice that's out there. It's the amount that's set aside for any construction variances that might occur there too. So that's why that one was recorded.
Thank you.
So, so getting into the overall financial items here. So the overall general fund balance. So for this year, we kind of track the overall percentages as compared to next year's budget. We did see a little bit of a dip from the 57 to the 53 percent for fund balance. But I want to kind of point out, this doesn't necessarily mean that the general fund balance dropped. It's just because next year's expenditures increased, which I think is kind of mainly due to I think there's a couple project costs that are flowing into, that weren't paid this year, that were flowing into next year that allow that budget to go up there. So that was the biggest reason for there, and I think just the kind of the timing of the ARPA dollars too. I'll kind of we'll flip to the next page, just kind of showing that we did have an increase of about 160,000 in the general fund, and I think that kind of points out that as expenditures increase in the general fund, and I think the next few years as the budgets come about, that those budgets are going to increase just because of where the costs are going up. That it is important to kind of follow that trend of having a slight increase in that fund balance year after year to follow what your next year's expenditures will be. So a couple of the differences in the variances. So the revenues had an additional 200,000 in revenue that came in. A good chunk of this was building permits that were a part of it, and then also just kind of plan review revenue coming in. So that's a lot of good things, a lot of growth within the city as that revenue comes in. The expenditures did come under budget by the 421,000. And a couple of items there. I think the personal services, or so like salaries, were down for this year, and they were basically in streets, engineering, and police. Each one of those had reductions in those costs of about $100,000 there, which resulted in that variance that occurred. There was one transfer out this year, mainly to kind of the general funds portion or the city's portion of the 2021 project that was transferred over from the general fund. So a combination of all those resulted in that increase of 158,000. And we have about 6.6 million in fund balance for the general fund. So overall, healthy general fund. We're above where that policy is, but right in line with where the kind of the state auditor would like the city to be. Let's see. We'll get there, I think.
Tom, if you had too much money coming in, does state auditor not like that?
Certainly, I think what a lot of cities do, they can, if the fund balances do get too high, they can set aside those dollars for capital reserves or assign them for particular purposes. Especially now, like with costs going up on construction, that I think you want to take a look at that. And really, it's all about planning out the next 5 years, because you can build up surplus in a particular fund for future projects so that you can avoid those tax spikes or even having to bond for that too. So it really kind of flows into, there's not a set say that if you have 80% or something, that's way too much. It really goes back to what your future planning is for the next 5 years on where those fund balances can be. Okay. And let's see. Went away on me. Yeah, let me see if I can. Let me close it and we'll see. I wonder.
Do you wanna just close the file
Yeah,
completely?
maybe we'll do that, yeah.
Oops, wrong thing.
See, we have it over on that screen here.
Yeah, there's like two screens.
Oh,
Yeah. Let's close all those. There we go. All right, maybe I'll just leave it like that and we'll flip through it. Okay, so we'll get it caught up here. Okay, next slide here is kind of talking about just the trends in the general fund revenues. Taxes are kind of increasing slightly year after year. What I would say about this is it's kind of following the inflationary rate of what your general fund is. We have a slide later that will talk about the tax rates. So I think that is more of an indicator on where your taxes are versus just the actual dollar amounts that are going over there, because the tax rate is what impacts the citizens. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Intergovernmental has been increasing some of the additional CARES dollars in there, and then ARPA dollars partly in there. And then charges for services did have an uptick this year, just because I think 2020 we were down because of COVID. Some of the things were shut down. That did jump up and almost getting back up to the 2019 level for charges for services. Taking a look at expenditures, the general government did increase slightly from the previous year, but just if you look at the inflationary trend from 19, it's kind of following that pattern. Public safety did have an uptick this year, but that was mainly that was budgeted in there, that we had a budgeted additional expenses in the public safety. And then streets and highways, engineering and other have kind of stayed flat compared to the 2019 and 20. Taking a look at the special revenue funds, just a couple items to note here. Park and Rec did increase by $535,000 for this last year, mainly due to additional charges that came in that were kind of down from the previous year just because of COVID. The sales tax revenue did decrease this year by about $823,000. The main reason for that is tied to about $780,000 in maintenance that was paid out of that fund for both the field house and then I think a little bit of the arena too, or the civic center a little bit too. So a combination of those charges came out of there. But for the sales tax revenue, about $1.5 million was collected off of the sales tax. Couple other items to note. So the economic development loan program, we show about almost 1.2 million in fund balance. The thing I want to point out there is that does not mean you have 1.2 million in cash because there's loans receivable that are going to be collected out of there. So actually this fund has about 436,000 in cash that can be used for future loans as part of the revolving fund there. And then the same thing, the state MIF grant, that 187,000 is strictly loans that are to come back. And the rehabilitation loan program of about 650,000 has 115,000 of cash of that fund balance. So I just wanted to point that out because I want to make it clear that's not cash available. That's the overall fund balance. Okay, and then special revenue funds. A good portion of your special revenue funds are restricted, mainly part of the sales tax that's out there, and then also the loan programs are both restricted type of dollars that can be used for specific purposes. The capital funds. So we have the sales tax referendum fund, which is the transfer of those sales tax dollars over there that has accumulated over the years. So that was certainly the plan of the city, is to accumulate those dollars for the arena construction project. So as you can see, that did decrease by about $8 million, which is directly related to the project costs that came out of that fund there. Running about $1 million deficit there, which is basically going to be the timing of additional sales tax dollars coming in there to cover that. So those will be transferred over. Capital Improvement Fund, we have about $4.3 million in just kind of the revolving capital fund, which did increase by about $608,000. We did have taxes of about $400,000 going in there, which is helping to build that for your future capital needs. And this kind of goes back to your question about, the reserves there too. So, putting those dollars aside for that 5-year capital plan and being able to spend those dollars out of there is to kind of do that. And then there was also additional $253,000 in charges for projects, or basically the charge out of engineer costs in that capital improvement fund. There's one deficit in there, the 2020 bonds, which will be probably when that project gets closed out, that we have that $900,000 in the 18 bonds that will close that out to basically zero out that deficit for next year. And then the 2021 bonds has about $400,000 in there, which will be spent down with the future projects. So debt service. So this is your overall. Now this is just the debt service of the city, which is going to be paid back by taxes and assessments there. So we have about $25 million in outstanding debt. So currently we have about $600,000 in cash. So there is collections of assessments and taxes annually here that will help pay for those debt payments. And the overall total assets is at $4.8 million. So basically what that's saying is that there's about $4.2 million in assessments yet to be collected for those bonds as it kind of follows with the maturity of those bonds. One thing also to note is we do have that sales tax bonds, so that those portions, which is a good chunk of it, which is about $6.8 million, that is going to be paid back by sales tax dollars for that bond. So that will be collected and not really a flat levy to pay back that debt. Okay, getting into a couple of the public utility funds here. So the electric fund, what we do with this graph is kind of take a look at on the utility funds, just how cash flow is for the utilities, and making sure that we're generating those dollars to cover those debt payments. The electric fund the operating receipts did exceed the operating disbursements and payments for this year. So we had about 1.5 million from operations. Cash did drop this year, and partly because we had about 3.5 million in capital that went back into the electric fund. So we spent down some of those reserves that we had previously to kind of have that 5.4 million in cash. What we do is we take a look at the target fund balance, just kind of at an overall policy is 50% of operating costs less depreciation. So we want to make sure that we're kind of setting aside enough dollars to cover those future improvements. It's going to be a little short here just because, some of the bigger projects you're probably going to have to bond for and pay over time, but that's just kind of the benchmark on where they're trying to get to. We'll look at the total public utilities a couple slides later, which will just kind of show all the utilities in one there. So the electric fund is a little bit lower, and obviously we spent down some of those dollars with the capital. District Energy Fund. So for this year, we did have the operations, which is pretty much kind of across the board with some of the gas prices that we're having there, is that those operating costs did jump up quite a bit there, and kind of along with the operating. So we did have a slight decrease in the overall operating cash flows there. But it was overall stayed pretty flat, as you can kind of see in the graph below that we have about 1.3 million for both 2020 and 21. So that stayed pretty flat, which, in all things considering is probably pretty good considering how some of the prices had jumped up, and especially with the natural gas that we'll talk about on the next slide too. And so obviously you can see the operating disbursements did jump up quite substantially this year. This is not unique to the city of New Ulm. This is just out there with the prices there. So there was kind of a significant decrease in that overall cash of about $2 million in the gas fund. You'll kind of see a spike in that target balance. That's just because of those operating costs that jumped up for 21. So that's kind of following those costs up there, but still within that operating range for the gas fund. The water utilities. So this has a little bit bigger margin than the others here. We got a increase in cash of about $100,000 there. So I think part of that also is we had about 1.4 million in capital that came out of there for this year. So a portion of that excess was used for capital and putting back into infrastructure for the water. Wastewater, kind of a similar situation. We did generate those dollars in the wastewater fund, but in this scenario, we have about 2.3 million in capital that came out this year. So certainly kind of doing that, but we did have a little bit of an increase in the restricted cash and also the actual cash totals there. What the restricted portion of it is mainly for debt service payments that are associated with the wastewater fund. The last slide for the public utilities, we had this is just kind of all the utilities put together. So as you can see, we did have those operating receipts exceeding the disbursements. And really, we're kind of right at that target balance for the actual cash. That's the piece that's not restricted there. So that's about right where we're at. We did have a decrease, and really, I think that's directly of kind of absorbing some of those costs for the gas prices that went up versus having it roll into the citizens on there. So that's that, and also some of the capital that that was put in there, which is a good thing that you're spending down some of the reserves to rather than bonding within the funds. Overall, cash balances, I think the biggest thing, we see a big drop here. That's directly in relationship to the spending down the sales tax for the arena. So all those project costs came out that were built up previously. So we spent those down. So the dark orange there is the capital project funds. And that reduced quite a bit as a result of that. So that's $8 million of the $12 million difference, and then we had a little bit within the public utilities dropping then too, which is putting it back into the infrastructure for the city. As I talked a little bit earlier about the tax rates. I think this is more of an indicator on how it impacts the citizens. So the tax rate takes into consideration the market value. So there's some variables in here on your overall market value, your mix between commercial and residential, and all that's taken into consideration from the tax rate. So this is what's rolled out to the citizens. So as you can see, even though the taxes did go up, the tax rate stayed relatively flat and even had a little bit of a downtick for 2021. We do comparisons of both Region 9 and then also Brown County and then Class 3 cities, which are cities similar in size with the city of New Ulm. So I'll say that you're really right in line with kind of Region 9 and below within the Brown County. And I think Brown County, I think you will be low just because your city has more commercial base that would impact this rate than other cities within Brown County. And then the Class 3 cities, I think you're getting into some cities that maybe have more commercial than the city of New Ulm. So you're kind of running ahead there. So I think what I look at here is there upticks in this tax rate going forward. And I think as you kind of see, this is something you look at the budgeting time and keep that relatively flat for the citizens so that they don't see the spikes in the taxes year over year. The taxes per capita did increase just because of the overall levy, but that doesn't, like I said, I focus more on the tax rate. Long-term debt, that stayed pretty consistent. Did have a decrease for 2021. And then I kind of look at the debt service expenditures per current expenditures. And this kind of gives you an idea of where your tax levy is going compared to other cities. Is it more on the debt levy side or more on the operational side of the city versus the general fund? And there's a little bit more of that levy going to debt here than others, but it stayed pretty consistent over the last 3 years. Current expenditures per capita, as you can see with the city of New Ulm, it stayed pretty consistent, within $100 per capita for the current expenditures. Capital can fluctuate based on that. So obviously, last couple years with some bigger projects, putting it back into the infrastructure, we had some higher amounts there. But that's just all, that can vary from year to year. So kind of with that, I certainly open it up to any questions that you might have. I'd be happy to answer those. And otherwise, I think those are kind of some of the financial numbers.
Have you got a crystal ball?
I wish I did.
Earlier in the discussion, I caught that about New Ulm's always been our fund balance has always been fantastic.
Yep.
Now, none of us have the crystal ball. I asked Nicole before, with the coming of August when we start our preliminary, with the massive inflation that's going on, And I know the state's, you know, where they want you to be in that.
Yep.
I don't think we've ever gone below, have we, Nicole, 45%?
Not in my time, I think we've always been.
Right.
Right at 50 or above.
I'm just a little worried this year with the inflationary cost, are we actually gonna first time ever hit that threshold where either we tax the hell out of the citizen or we gotta lower this somehow?
Yeah.
Just because of our
Yep.
operating costs.
You know, and across the board, you know, we're looking, you know, I think probably in the budget cycles, you're probably, in the past, you're looking at 3%, you know, kind of inflation there. It's, you know, it's probably approaching 6 to 8, you know, that, you know, I think you got to plan for that. You know, I think the bigger thing is construction costs too, as you go. You know, interest rates are also going. I think the things to look at is kind of plan for those operational side of things, which is mainly the general fund. You know, I think with interest rates going, you know, not knowing where that is, you know, you kind of take a look at that. You know, keeping things relatively short term, just because you know, you can balance it out, but if their interest rates moving up, you don't necessarily want to lock yourself into a lower interest rate if it's kind of going in. So those are the things you can kind of hedge, you know, and I think balancing your portfolio to do that, because you do have a lot of investments that you have out there, and trying to maximize that interest. You're hoping that can offset some of your inflationary increases then too. So, you know, I think those are some of the things, you know, as you work with your investment advisors, they're gonna be saying the same thing, because right now it's increasing, and we haven't been in this situation for several years where interest is actually moving up, you know, and on top of that, you know, bonding's gonna be at a higher interest rate too, you know, so, you know, I think the more, you know, you could set aside those dollars and cash flow it, you know, internally type of thing, you're gonna save on some interest rates there, where in the past, it was almost free money with some of the interest rates that, hey, you can put that into construction, and it's almost worth bonding for, because it's at such low rates. So, you know, like I said, I wish I did have that crystal ball, but I think those are the types of things you just gotta hedge as you're moving forward in the next few years. And I think the other thing to watch out, right now, the state has a surplus. I think when we were talking about that before, it wasn't too long ago that, you know, they were cutting LGA and stuff like that too. It's not doom and gloom there, but things can change, and I think just kind of monitoring that too, because that's a big piece of your revenue too. So it's, you know, I think it's just, you know, those things to kind of think about and plan moving forward. Hopefully that gave you a little.
I'll quote you on that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and I know that, you know, as far as other cities of similar size, I mean, financially, we continue to be positioned well. We continue to save well. I don't know, Nicole, like, I mean, what are you hearing about anything regarding inflation and bond changes? And, you know, I'm sure you're aware of.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, inflation is gonna completely affect our budget next year. I mean, the department should be looking at that from a 0-point budgeting stance. So, you know, what is some of this stuff actually gonna cost me next year? And what do we add in, you know, as a wish list, and what do we, you know, what do we really need at this point? The market value increases for property taxes are gonna have a huge impact on how we budget this year. You know, how do we play with that with the tax rates? Do we, you know, do the citizens have to absorb that whole market value increase just to keep that? And we might need that money to cover the levy. We're so early.
It's hard to say, but every city, I mean, they're all in this position, so I'd rather be where we are now than some other cities that maybe didn't come out of COVID so well, so, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll also say we certainly appreciate working with management. They give us the information in a timely manner, which is very important to us. So I think I want to recognize that, and certainly want to thank you for continuing to work with us. And if there's anything you need throughout the year, just feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hard copies of the budget, you have to let, or the.
Remember my classmate John Becker by chance? Looks like John.
I went to school with Frank, his younger brother.
Didn't he?
Yeah. Oh, he was a cat.
I vaguely remember.
Oh, I love
John
him.
was a good pal.
I love hanging with him. He could be a goofball,